Some battles don't need noise, and sometimes silence is the most terrifying weapon that makes those who disrespected you regret it for a lifetime. If you've ever been manipulated, belittled or gaslighted by a narcissist, you know what it feels like to be emotionally swallowed. They make you doubt yourself, twist the truth, and somehow you end up apologizing for the pain they caused. But here's what they don't expect. Your silence isn't weakness, it's a quiet comeback. Powerful, poised, and unforgettable. In today's video, I'm revealing 5 silent moves that are incredibly powerful. These are not acts of revenge, but a reclaiming of your life, your dignity, and your peace. You won't need to scream to prove your worth. You'll simply disappear at the right time, grow in the right direction, and live a life that no longer includes them. If you're looking for a way to heal, evolve, and silently make them realize what they've lost, you're in the right place. Make sure to subscribe if you want more content that empowers, heals, and uplifts. And don't go anywhere, because the last silent move might just leave them thinking about you for the rest of their life. 1. Going no contact. There's one form of resistance more powerful than any angry word or tearful plea, especially in toxic relationships with narcissists. Complete disappearance. No texts, no calls, no explanations, no goodbyes, just gone. Going no contact is the ultimate boundary. It's what you do when you're exhausted from meaningless arguments, emotional manipulation, and endless cycles of pain, followed by false apologies. For normal people, a breakup is sad. But for narcissists, your silence is a blow to their inflated ego. They don't hate you because you left. They hate that you didn't let them control how you left. You didn't explain. You didn't beg. You didn't react the way they scripted you to react. And that throws them off completely. Because if they can't control your response, they can't feed their ego. And for a narcissist, loss of control equals loss of power. At first, they'll pretend not to care. They'll post pictures, act unbothered, maybe even spread rumors. But as the silence stretches, something shifts. You're no longer giving them attention, anger, sadness, anything. And in their world, your emotions were their fuel. Without that fuel, they start to panic, even if they'll never admit it. But hear this, no contact is not revenge, it's self-respect, it's healing. You're no longer seeking validation, you're no longer waiting for change, you're no longer explaining your pain, you're choosing peace over chaos. And sometimes your absence teaches them more than your presence ever could. They might try to hoover you back in, fake apologies, indirect messages, smear campaigns, but that's not love, that's panic. That's the sound of control slipping through their fingers. And every time you hold that silence, you are saying, I choose me. I will never trade my peace for your approval again. No contact is hard, but it's one of the bravest and most loving things you'll ever do for yourself. And one day, when they realize what your silence truly meant, regret will speak louder than any word you never said. 2. Silent self-transformation. There is a kind of quiet retaliation that needs no words, no justification, and no loud declarations. It's not a performance, it's not a post, it's not for show, it's growth. Done in silence, for no one else but yourself. You don't scream that you're fine, you don't post pictures to prove that you've moved on, you simply start to become who you were always meant to be, before they broke you down, before they made you question your worth, before they rewrote your identity. A narcissist doesn't want you healed. They want you confused, anxious, dependent. Your chaos makes them feel powerful. Your neediness is their fuel. But when you suddenly go quiet, not as a game, not as revenge, but because you're choosing peace over drama, and when that silence is paired with steady, visible change, that's when they start to unravel. You begin working out, not to impress anyone, but to reclaim your body and your strength. You read, you study, you learn, not to appear deep, but because your mind deserves to expand beyond their manipulation. You dress differently, not to seduce, but to reflect your reborn self. You declutter your space. You unfollow mutual enablers. You remove every trace of their control, without a word, without a warning. Every small shift becomes a declaration. I choose me again. I no longer need to be seen to feel whole. I am quietly rebuilding, and this time it's real. At first they'll convince themselves you're doing it for attention, but when you're not posting about it, not tagging them, not even throwing hints, and yet you're clearly changing. Day by day, stronger and lighter, they begin to pack, because for the first time, your life no longer orbits around them. You're not growing to make them jealous. You're not glowing to make them miss you. You're simply living. And that terrifies them more than any angry confrontation ever could, because now they can't measure their importance through your reactions. They can't manipulate your highs and lows. You've stepped out of their emotional theater, and they no longer know your script. Here's the twist. The more you grow, the less you care about whether or not they're watching. The healing becomes internal. You stop needing them to see or glow up. You no longer crave their regret. You don't grow to provoke. They're not even part of the equation anymore. You grow because pain demanded transformation. You grow because you refuse to live one more day repeating the same emotional patterns. You grow because you were tired of being small in your own life. And when transformation becomes your new normal, when your own reflection begins to smile back at you with pride, they cease to matter. Their opinions, their validation, their absence. It all becomes irrelevant noise. This isn't revenge, this is liberation. So if you're in that quiet place right now where everything hurts, but you've chosen to move forward anyway, keep going. Don't explain, don't announce, don't rush. Just let your progress be your proof. Let your peace speak louder than any post. Let your silence carry the weight of your rebirth. You came back, not to fight, but to live. And this time, you live for you. 3. No justification. There comes a stage in your healing journey when you no longer feel the need to explain yourself. Not to them, not to anyone. You stop trying to prove your point. You stop rehearsing your pain for someone who never truly listened. You realize that, with a narcissist, truth is not something they seek to understand. It's something they twist, distort, weaponize. You're not silent because you have nothing to say. You're silent because everything you've said before was ignored, dismissed, or turned against you. And you're tired, not emotionally weak. Just done. Done trying to convince someone who was never open to understanding you in the first place. With a narcissist, justification is part of their power play. The more you explain, the more they manipulate. The more you try to be understood, the more they use your words to create confusion and guilt. But when you go quiet, without justification, without defense, that's when you begin to take your power back. Because they expect your reaction. They expect your tears, your rage, your desperate texts. That's how they confirm that they still matter to you. Your emotional chaos is their fuel. But when you offer nothing, no reaction, no denial, no defense, they lose control. You're no longer trying to clear your name. You're no longer playing the role they've written for you, the one who pleads, who begs, who breaks. You are simply walking away, and that silence is deafening. You don't need to explain why you left. You don't need to defend the fact that you finally chose yourself, because deep down they already know, and even deeper down they will never admit it. Silence is not weakness. It is clarity. It is self-respect. It is the refusal to waste another breath on a battle that was never meant to be fair. You are no longer reacting to the manipulation. You are choosing peace over performance. You are no longer trying to be seen, understood, or redeemed in their eyes. And that, ironically, is when you become most powerful. They may paint you as cold, they may lie about you, they may create a story that makes them the victim and you the villain. And the hardest truth? You can't control that. But what you can control, what truly matters, is your own peace, your own truth, and your decision to stop seeking justice in a place that never offered it. No justification doesn't mean you don't have a story. It means you no longer need an audience for it. You no longer require their validation to know you did the right thing. You no longer need to explain your pain to someone who caused it and then denied it. They wanted a reaction, you gave them silence. They wanted confusion, you gave them clarity. And when the lies settle, when the dust clears, and when they realize that you never came back to explain yourself, that silence will echo louder than anything you could have said. You are not weak for walking away without a word. You are powerful because you finally understand that not every truth deserves to be defended. Some truths just need to be lived. You don't owe them a version of your story. You don't owe them closure. What you owe is to yourself, your healing, your freedom, your future. And sometimes the most powerful thing you'll ever say is nothing at all. 4. Polite detachment. After everything, when you can't completely avoid them, whether it's due to work, family, or some unavoidable connection, the only way to protect yourself is to master the art of polite detachment. This isn't about pretending. It's not about ignoring. It's a high level of awareness, where you still carry yourself with dignity and respect, but you no longer give them access to your emotional world. For narcissists, what makes them feel powerful isn't just what you say, it's what you feel when you're around them. They study your eyes, your tone, your body language. They want to see if you're still affected, if they still have a grip on your emotional center. And that's why the most unsettling thing you can do is show up calm, composed, and completely emotionless. You don't engage in deep conversation, you don't play into their jokes, you don't share your life updates, you give them nothing, not joy, not anger, not sadness. You look at them the way you'd look at someone you used to know, someone whose presence no longer stirs anything inside you. That coldness doesn't come from hatred, it comes from exhaustion, from the full realization that there's nothing more to expect from them. You don't hate them, you don't need them, you simply no longer care. And that is terrifying to them. Because narcissists can handle your rage, your heartbreak, your breakdowns, but they cannot handle your indifference. Indifference means you're no longer playing. It means the emotional game they used to win is over. They may try to provoke you with sarcastic comments, subtle insults, or nostalgic remarks. You respond with a neutral smile, you nod, you change the subject, you treat them like noise in a crowded room, something you acknowledge but don't let in. And in doing so, you declare, I am no longer who I was. The version of you they remember needed to be understood, needed to be forgiven, needed to be liked. That version cried, explained, defended, but this version, you, has outgrown the need to be validated. This version understands that no one can make you feel inferior without your permission, and the most powerful way to refuse that permission is not to scream, you don't control me, it's to look at them with quiet calm and make it clear, you don't exist in my emotional world anymore. This level of detachment takes practice. It doesn't come from bitterness, it comes from deep healing. Only when you've truly stepped out of the emotional chaos can you reclaim your calm. You begin to realize how sacred your emotional energy is. You don't give pieces of your soul to people who once used your trust against you. You keep your dignity, you keep your peace. And that, more than any confrontation, tells them the truth. Polite detachment is the art of holding your head high, not to be arrogant, but to be grounded. You remain in the same room, but your spirit is untouched. You engage just enough to be civil, but never enough to open the door back into your life. And what unsettles them most isn't what you say, it's how calmly you say nothing of meaning. They'll wonder, have you truly forgotten them? Or did you simply learn to live as though they never existed at all? Either way, they're no longer part of your power. And for a narcissist, that is the ultimate fear. Not that you're angry, but that you've moved on with grace. 5. Living a life that no longer includes them. Sometimes the most powerful silent move isn't cutting contact. It isn't deleting their number. It isn't blocking them or refusing to speak. It's when you start living a life in which they simply no longer exist. Not because you forced them out, but because their presence is no longer relevant to any part of who you're becoming. They're not the center, not the memory you hold on to, not the shadow you're running from. They're just nothing. When you reach this point, you don't need to be happier to prove anything. You're not posting to show the world you've moved on. You're not living your life to make them regret. You're just living. And the truth of that is so clear, so quiet, so complete, it doesn't need to be announced. You start building your life again, piece by piece, from the inside out, new habits, healthier boundaries, relationships that feel safe. You choose friends who bring peace. You build a home that feels like you. You set standards, not out of fear, but because you finally know your worth. In this life, they don't belong. They're not the thought that haunts you in the morning. They're not the reason you hesitate. They're not even the background noise anymore. And the most beautiful part? You didn't have to force it. It happened naturally. Because healing took root. Because you stopped needing to rewrite the past. Because you've grown too much to keep shrinking for someone who only loved the broken version of you. This isn't denial. You're not pretending they never existed. You're not erasing history. You're just no longer letting history define who you are. That chapter is closed. You read it, you learned, and now you're writing something new, without them in the margins, without needing them as a contrast, without needing a villain to feel like the hero, just you, and a future that finally belongs to you. For the narcissist, this is the real punishment. Not rage, not revenge, but the unsettling realization that you left without making a sound. No final fight, no dramatic exit, no attention, just absence. Clear, full, and irreversible. They might try to reach out, pretend to care, resurface with familiar words, but you don't respond, not because you're bitter, but because you're not even on the same frequency anymore. You're living a life of your own, a life where peace doesn't come from being accepted, but from no longer needing anyone's approval to feel whole. You go to work, you come home, you care for yourself, you reconnect with the parts of you that were ignored while trying to survive. You don't need an audience for this journey. You don't need applause. You don't need to prove anything. Because this time, you're not living to be loved. You're living because you know you are worth loving. And one day, when they come across your name, through someone else on social media in passing, they won't recognize you anymore, not because you've changed, but because you no longer reflect the version of yourself they once controlled. You're free now, and the silence you carry with you isn't escape, it's the final, quiet declaration of someone who is truly, fully, finally. 6. Letting them look bad in silence. There's a kind of silence that requires deep strength. Not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of choosing not to correct the lies they tell about you. You know the ones. The twisted stories they spread after you finally walked away. Stories that paint you as selfish, ungrateful, cold. Stories that cast them as the victim who tried so hard, but was left behind without warning. In the past, you would have rushed to explain. You would have sent long messages, tried to clarify the truth, told your side to everyone who would listen. But eventually you realize this. Every time you try to correct their narrative, you're stepping back into their game. And you're done. You're done exhausting yourself trying to fix the version of you they've created for others. This silence isn't agreement. It's a declaration. I don't need to convince anyone. The truth will stand on its own. You no longer post cryptic messages. You don't chase people to tell your side. You don't beg anyone not to misunderstand you, because you finally learnt those who genuinely want to know the truth will feel it in how you live, not in how you explain. And those who blindly believe the narcissist version of events, they weren't really listening in the first place. Narcissists are master storytellers. They know how to spin a narrative where they're the wounded one, the misunderstood one, the one who just loved too much. They'll take the very pain they caused and wear it like a scar they claim you left behind. But this time, you're not stepping in to clean up the mess. You're not fighting the rumor mill. You're not defending yourself. You're just living, quietly, steadily, truthfully. And that's what rattles them most. You're not fixing their mess anymore. You let them tell their story, and you let the truth tell yours, through your calm, your choices, your consistency. You no longer react, but you also don't pretend. You simply let time do what time always does. Reveal. It might cost you some relationships, it might mean some people never hear your side, but what you protect in return is far more valuable. Your peace, the kind of peace that no false narrative can touch. This is the silence of self-respect. You're not standing in the middle of the world shouting, "I'm not the bad guy." You're standing somewhere higher, somewhere steady, where you know exactly who you are, and no one else's version of the story can change that. Truth doesn't need defense. It needs time, it needs stillness. It needs you to stop bleeding your energy into every fire they start. Because eventually things will shift, not because you demanded it, not because you exposed them, but because their words will no longer align with how you show up in the world. And people will start to notice, quietly, privately. You may never hear the apologies, you may never receive the confessions, but your silence, steady, strong, and free of malice, will speak the loudest. When their false story crumbles, and you're still standing, thriving, not bitter, not broken, that's when the truth will finally echo, not because you forced it, but because you chose yourself over the need to be understood. 7. Not reacting to provocation. One of the most unsettling things for someone who once thrived on emotional power over you is this: you no longer react. For a narcissist, few things are more frustrating than trying to provoke a reaction and getting nothing. They'll pull the usual tricks, vague posts aimed at you, subtle jabs, texts by accident, staged encounters, or even triangulating with others to get your attention. But this time, you don't take the bait. You don't get angry. You don't retaliate. You don't make a scene. You stay silent. Grounded. Not out of fear, but because you finally understand reaction is power. And you're keeping that power for yourself. When a narcissist can no longer stir your emotions, they start to unravel. Before, they'd throw one sentence and have you spinning. They'd ghost you for days and watch you spiral. They'd drop a half-hearted message and leave you guessing for hours. But now, they'd try all that and you remain unmoved. And that doesn't just frustrate them. It threatens their entire identity. Because their only real influence was in how much they could shake you. You might still see the messages. You might still stumble across the posts. You might hear through others that they're talking about you, but instead of reacting the way you once would, panicked, defensive, anxious, you just exhale. Maybe you smile. Maybe you shrug. Maybe you just carry on. Not because you're pretending not to care, but because you've finally realized that not everything deserves your energy. Every time you don't respond, you reclaim a little more of yourself. You're not just ignoring them. You're choosing peace over chaos. This is a higher level of emotional maturity. It requires you to resist the impulse to teach them a lesson, to let go of the need to be right, to be heard, to set the record straight. You have to watch them throw stones and know deep inside, you don't have to throw anything back, because you see it clearly now. The game is old, and you're done playing. Others might not understand what you're doing. They may ask, why aren't you saying anything? Aren't you going to respond? But you no longer owe anyone a reaction. You're not rebuilding your reputation with rebuttals. Your silence, if rooted in clarity, will send a far stronger message than any argument ever could. People with intuition, with empathy, will sense your shift. And those who don't, they were never meant to walk beside you. Silence doesn't mean you feel nothing. Maybe part of you still hurts. Maybe hearing their name still stings. But you don't let them see that anymore, not because you're faking strength, but because you're training yourself to stay free. You respond, they win. You stay still, you keep your power. And as you stay consistent in this, you start to feel different, calmer, stronger. You stop needing to win. You stop fearing loss. You just want peace. And when the narcissist realizes that they can scream into your silence and still not move you, that's when they understand the game is over. They lost, not because you attacked them, but because you stopped showing up. 8. Refusing to create a perfect ending. One of the reasons so many people struggle to truly walk away is because they're still holding out hope for a beautiful ending, a peaceful goodbye, a mature conversation, closure, the kind where everything is finally explained, forgiven, and resolved. But with a narcissist, a perfect ending is rarely what it seems. It's a trap, wrapped in charm and emotion. You come in hoping for closure, they come in hoping for control. And if you're not careful, you'll mistake their softness for sincerity and fall right back into the cycle you fought so hard to escape. They might say all the right things. We can still be friends. I understand you need space. You'll always be special to me. It sounds calm, kind, reasonable. But underneath every word is a hook, one you don't always see until it's already pulling you back in. One message, one final meeting, one harmless conversation, and suddenly you're right back where you started. Not as an equal, not as someone respected, but as someone being gently re-caged inside a familiar dynamic. Choosing not to seek a perfect ending doesn't make you cold or immature. It means you've grown enough to know some stories don't need to be closed with words. They need to be closed with distance. You don't need to fix something that was never truly whole. You don't need to sit down with someone who repeatedly broke your boundaries to hear their version of truth. You don't need to wrap a painful story in a pretty bow just so it feels easier to file away. It was messy, it was real, and now it's done. If forgiveness is needed, it will come from within, not from a final conversation. Narcissists often use the idea of closure as a tactic. They'll pretend they want resolution, accountability, or honesty, but what they're really checking for is whether they still have access to you, whether your heart is still reachable, whether your boundaries are still flexible. If you let them back in just once, they'll find a way to reset the stage. New script, same control. You don't need a final talk. You don't need to write a heartfelt letter. You don't need to sit across from them one last time to make peace. Freedom doesn't come from what you say at the end. It comes from choosing not to say anything anymore. It comes from walking away, not with bitterness, but with quiet confidence. It comes from releasing the need for them to understand, to apologize, or to give you permission to move on. You don't need their blessing. You don't need mutual closure. You need your own peace and a future where their voice no longer echoes in your choices. Remember, the most beautiful ending isn't the one that makes both people feel good. It's the one that finally brings you back to yourself, whole, unchained, and undisturbed. Not everything that begins with emotion needs to end with a conversation. Some connections end in silence because one person finally woke up. And if that person is you, then there's nothing more to do. You've already done enough. You don't need to shout to be respected. You don't need revenge to prove your worth. You don't need to destroy someone else to rise from your pain, because sometimes your silence, when rooted in strength, is the loudest declaration you'll ever make. I've woken up. I'm no longer available to the person who made me question my value. The 8 silent moves you've just learned aren't games. They're not manipulation. They are quiet, deliberate steps, each one pulling you further away from the narcissist's control, from emotional exhaustion, and from the endless cycle of proving and apologizing. And most importantly, they bring you back to the center of your own life. If you've ever felt small, if you've ever dimmed your light to be loved, if you've ever tried to earn affection by betraying your own needs, know this: you don't have to live that way anymore. You have the right to choose silence. Not because you're weak, but because you've grown strong enough to know you owe no one an explanation. When you stop reacting, they start wondering. When you stop justifying, they begin to lose control. When you stop playing their game, you win, not over them, but over yourself. So keep walking, quietly, steadily, and with grace, because the right kind of silence, held at the right moment, will echo louder than anything they'll ever forget.